The city of Springfield had seen better days. For years, people had complained about how things were run, especially when it came to the police department. Stories about unfair treatment had become all too common, and trust between the community and law enforcement was at an all-time low. Everything changed when James Wilson, a 42-year-old community leader, decided to run for mayor. James wasn't your typical politician. He grew up in the very neighborhoods that needed help the most. He knew what it felt like to be stopped by police for no reason, to be judged by the color of his skin rather than the content of his character. His campaign message was simple: together, we can make Springfield work for everyone. He talked about fixing the police department, creating better relationships between officers and residents, and bringing real change to the city. People believed him because he spoke from the heart, from experience. On election night, the results were clear. James Wilson would be Springfield's first black mayor. The victory celebration was filled with hope and excitement. Young and old, people from all backgrounds came together, believing that finally things would be different. Officer Michael Sullivan watched the election results from his patrol car. He had been with the Springfield Police Department for 15 years, most of his adult life. To him, the new mayor represented everything that was wrong with the direction the city was heading. Another politician making promises they can't keep, he muttered to himself. Michael had grown up in a different Springfield. His father had been a police officer too, back when things were simpler, as he liked to say. Over the years, Michael had received several complaints about his aggressive approach, particularly when dealing with minority residents. But he always justified his actions, believing he was just doing his job, keeping the streets safe. Mayor Wilson's first day in office was unlike any other mayor before him. Instead of sitting behind a desk, he walked through City Hall, talking to employees, asking about their jobs, their concerns. He met with department heads, but more importantly, he listened to the cleaning staff, the security guards, the people who often went unnoticed. "I want to understand this city from the ground up," he told his chief of staff, Linda. "Not just from reports and statistics, but from real experiences." That's when James came up with an unusual idea. He would occasionally walk through different neighborhoods in regular clothes, not as the mayor, but as a resident. He wanted to see firsthand how people lived, what they needed, and yes, how they were treated by city services, including the police. Linda was worried. "Sir, this could be dangerous. At least take security with you." But James was determined. "If I'm going to fix the trust problem in this city, I need to experience what our residents experience. No special treatment." In the police department, changes were already being discussed. Chief Rebecca Martinez, appointed by the previous administration but kept on by Mayor Wilson, was tasked with implementing new training programs. The focus would be on community policing, de-escalation techniques, and addressing implicit bias. Officer Sullivan and many of his colleagues were resistant. During a briefing about the upcoming changes, he spoke up. "We already know how to do our jobs. We don't need some politician telling us how to police the streets." The tension was palpable. The department was divided between those who welcomed change and those who saw it as an attack on their profession. Meanwhile, Mayor Wilson continued his walks through the city. He visited local businesses, talked to kids playing basketball in the park, and sat with elderly residents on their porches. He took notes, not just about what needed fixing, but about what was working well. What James didn't know was that his simple walks would soon lead to an encounter that would change everything. An encounter that would force the entire city to confront its deepest problems and, hopefully, find a way forward together. The stage was set for a confrontation that nobody saw coming, one that would test the very foundations of justice and understanding in Springfield. It was a cool Friday evening when everything changed. Mayor Wilson had decided to take one of his regular walks through the Oak Street neighborhood, an area that had recently seen a string of car break-ins. He wore his favorite gray hoodie and jeans, looking like any other resident out for an evening stroll. The mayor had parked his old Honda Civic on Maple Avenue, deliberately choosing his personal car instead of the official vehicle. As he walked back to it after talking with some local shop owners, he realized he'd left his notebook in the glove compartment. He needed it to jot down some concerns residents had shared with him. Officer Sullivan was finishing his shift, driving through the same neighborhood. The recent car thefts had put everyone on high alert. As he turned onto Maple Avenue, his headlights caught someone leaning into a car, hood up, seemingly fumbling with something inside. Another one, Sullivan thought, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. Years of experience kicked in, but so did his assumptions. He saw what he expected to see, a suspicious person in a high-crime area matching the description of recent incidents. Mayor Wilson was having trouble finding his notebook in the messy glove compartment. Old receipts, registration papers, and candy wrappers made the search difficult. He was so focused on his task that he didn't notice the police cruiser pulling up behind him. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Sullivan's voice cut through the quiet evening. The mayor straightened up, surprised by the sudden command. He turned slowly, notebook finally in hand. "Officer, this is my car. I'm just—" "I said hands up now." Sullivan was already out of his vehicle, one hand on his weapon. Mayor Wilson raised his hands, notebook still clutched in one. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Don't move. You're breaking into this vehicle." "No, this is my car. If you'll let me show you my ID." As the mayor slowly reached for his wallet, Sullivan interpreted the movement as a threat. Years of training mixed with deep-seated biases took over. He rushed forward, grabbing the mayor's arm and twisting it behind his back. "I said don't move," Sullivan shouted, adrenaline pumping through his veins. The mayor tried to explain again, but Sullivan wasn't listening. In his mind, he was dealing with a criminal caught in the act. When the mayor attempted to turn his head to speak, Sullivan saw it as resistance. The punch came fast and hard. Mayor Wilson felt the impact against his cheek, his vision blurring as he stumbled backward. He fell to the ground, his notebook scattering loose pages across the sidewalk. "Suspect resisting arrest." Sullivan called into his radio, "Need backup at Maple and 3rd. Blood trickled from the mayor's nose as he lay on the cold pavement. His head was spinning, not just from the punch, but from the shock of what was happening. He'd experienced unfair treatment before, but never like this, never with such immediate violence. Within minutes, 2 more police cars arrived, lights flashing in the growing darkness. Officers Johnson and Rodriguez jumped out, ready to assist their colleague. "Got him trying to break into this Honda," Sullivan explained, still breathing heavily. Suspect was non-compliant, reached for something in his pocket. Officer Rodriguez approached the man on the ground, flashlight in hand. As the beam hit the mayor's face, her eyes widened in recognition. Despite the blood and swelling, she knew exactly who this was. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mike, stop." That's Mayor Wilson." Sullivan scoffed. "Yeah, right, nice try." "No, Mike, look." Rodriguez insisted, her voice rising with urgency. "It's really him." As more officers gathered around, the terrible truth began to dawn on everyone. The man lying bloodied on the ground wasn't a car thief. He was their newly elected mayor, the very person who had promised to bring change to their department. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Someone had called for an ambulance. In the distance, the first news van was already turning onto Maple Avenue, drawn by the police scanner chatter. What had started as a routine patrol had just become the biggest scandal in Springfield's history. The flashing red and blue lights painted the street in an eerie glow. More officers arrived, each one stopping in their tracks as they recognized the man on the ground. The whispers spread like wildfire through the growing crowd of first responders. "That's the mayor. Oh God, that's Mayor Wilson." Officer Sullivan stood frozen, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. "No, that can't be right," he kept repeating, his voice growing weaker with each word. Chief Martinez's car screeched to a halt at the scene. She had been at home when the call came in about an officer-involved incident. Nothing could have prepared her for what she found. She pushed through the circle of officers, her heart sinking as she saw her mayor lying on the cold pavement. "What happened here?" she demanded, though the blood on Mayor Wilson's face told its own story. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward, her body camera still recording. "Chief," Officer Sullivan responded to what he thought was a car break-in. He didn't recognize the mayor. The chief knelt beside Mayor Wilson, who was slowly sitting up with the help of paramedics. "Mr. Mayor, are you all right? We're getting you help right away." Through swollen lips, the mayor managed to speak. "I was just getting my notebook from my own car." The reality of the situation hit everyone like a thunderbolt. News crews were now setting up cameras across the street, their bright lights cutting through the darkness. Residents had begun gathering behind the police tape, phones raised, recording everything. Sullivan's face had gone pale. His hands shook as he looked at them, still unable to process what he had done. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was him," he stammered. "Your body camera was on, right?" Chief Martinez asked, already knowing the answer. Every officer wore one now, a recent policy change. Sullivan nodded numbly. The camera had captured everything, every word, every action, every assumption he had made. As paramedics helped the mayor onto a stretcher, reporters shouted questions from behind the police line. "Mayor Wilson, can you tell us what happened? Was this racially motivated? Will you press charges?" The mayor raised his hand slightly, signaling for quiet. Despite his injuries, his voice carried strength. "Right now, I need medical attention. We'll address this properly once all facts are gathered." Chief Martinez turned to Sullivan. "Officer Sullivan, I'm placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately. Surrender your badge and weapon." The words seemed to snap Sullivan out of his daze. As he handed over his badge, the weight of his actions finally seemed to hit him. This wasn't just any citizen he had assaulted. This was the mayor of Springfield. Inside the ambulance, the mayor's aide, Linda, held his hand. She had rushed to the scene after receiving a frantic call. "Sir, this is going to be everywhere by morning," she said softly. "I know," the mayor replied, wincing as the ambulance hit a bump. "But maybe this is the wake-up call our city needed." Back at the scene, Chief Martinez faced the growing crowd of reporters. "The Springfield Police Department will conduct a thorough investigation into tonight's incident. We are committed to transparency and accountability." But her words felt hollow even to her own ears. How could they explain that their own officer had attacked the mayor? How could they justify what appeared to be another case of racial profiling, this time against the very person elected to fix such problems? Social media exploded with the news. Videos taken by witnesses showed different angles of the incident. The hashtag Springfield Mayor began trending within hours. At the hospital, doctors confirmed the mayor had a broken nose and several facial contusions. As they treated his injuries, the mayor couldn't help but think of all the others who had experienced similar treatment but didn't have his position or platform to demand justice. Officer Sullivan sat alone in a locker room, staring at his empty locker. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues, some supportive, others condemning. His wife called repeatedly, having seen the news on television. As the night wore on, one thing became crystal clear to everyone in Springfield. This incident would change everything. The conversation about police reform was no longer theoretical. It had become painfully, undeniably real. The morning after the incident, Springfield woke up to a changed reality. News vans lined the streets outside City Hall and the police department. The story had gone national overnight, with headlines screaming about police brutality against a mayor. At Springfield General Hospital, Mayor Wilson sat propped up in bed, his face swollen and bruised. Doctors had reset his broken nose, and the white bandage stood out starkly against his skin. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn, but he'd only answered calls from his closest advisors. Linda, his chief of staff, sat beside him, laptop open, scrolling through news coverage. "Every major network is running the story, sir. The video has millions of views already." The mayor nodded slowly, each movement sending a dull ache through his face. "What's the public response?" "Mixed, but mostly outrage. People are calling for Officer Sullivan's immediate termination. There are protests planned for this afternoon outside the police station." Across town, Officer Sullivan sat at his kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His wife, Maria, moved quietly around the kitchen, unsure of what to say. Their 2 children had already left for school, thankfully before the morning news began its relentless coverage. Maria finally broke the silence. "Michael, the school called. They said I should take a few days off. Parents are upset." Sullivan looked up, seeing the worry in his wife's eyes. "I'm sorry, Maria. I never meant for any of this to happen." At police headquarters, Chief Martinez called an emergency meeting with her command staff. The conference room was tense as they reviewed the body camera footage for what felt like the 100th time. "The footage is clear," the chief said grimly. Officer Sullivan failed to follow proper procedure. He escalated the situation unnecessarily. Captain Reynolds, head of internal affairs, nodded. "The preliminary investigation shows multiple policy violations. We're looking at excessive force, failure to properly identify, and potential civil rights violations." Outside, protesters had begun gathering. Signs reading "Justice for Mayor Wilson" and "End Police Brutality" bobbed above the growing crowd. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing the scene. At City Hall, the phones rang non-stop. Council members demanded answers, civil rights organizations offered support, and citizens called to express both outrage and, surprisingly, some support for the officer. The mayor's press secretary, David Chen, held a briefing. "Mayor Wilson is recovering and in stable condition. He's asked for calm and patience while the investigation proceeds." The mayor believes this incident, while unfortunate, presents an opportunity for meaningful dialogue about police reform. But calm was hard to find. Social media was ablaze with debates about racial profiling, police training, and accountability. Some defended Officer Sullivan, arguing he was just doing his job in a high-crime area. Others saw it as proof of systemic problems within law enforcement. Sullivan's union representative, Tom Bradley, issued a statement. "Officer Sullivan has served this community with distinction for 15 years. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding, not an act of malice." However, as details of Sullivan's past complaints emerged, that narrative became harder to maintain. Records showed a pattern of aggressive behavior, particularly toward minority residents. Back at the hospital, Mayor Wilson received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patricia Johnson, an elderly woman from Oak Street, had brought flowers. "I've lived in that neighborhood for 40 years, she told him. "I've seen how they treat us. I'm glad it happened to someone who can actually do something about it." Her words struck the mayor deeply. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had experienced unfair treatment but lacked the platform to demand change. As the day progressed, the city council called an emergency session. National civil rights leaders announced they were coming to Springfield. The Department of Justice opened a preliminary inquiry. By evening, the hospital released Mayor Wilson. As he stepped outside, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. He raised his hand for silence. "What happened to me happens to too many people every day," he said, his voice steady despite his injuries. "The difference is, I have the power to make sure it stops happening. That work begins now." The crowd fell silent, understanding that this moment would define Springfield's future. The real challenge was just beginning. The investigation into the incident moved swiftly. Internal Affairs worked around the clock, interviewing witnesses, reviewing footage, and digging through Officer Sullivan's personnel file. What they found painted a troubling picture. In a small conference room at police headquarters, Captain Reynolds spread out 15 years' worth of complaints. 27 complaints in total, he told Chief Martinez. 19 involved minority residents. 8 specifically mentioned unnecessary force. The chief studied the papers, her expression growing darker with each page. Why was he still on the street? Previous administration always ruled them unfounded or not sustained. No real investigations were done. Meanwhile, Mayor Wilson had returned to work, his face still bearing visible bruises. He called a series of community meetings across the city, determined to hear from residents directly. At Lincoln Community Center, the room overflowed with people eager to share their stories. An elderly man stood up first, his voice shaking. "I've been stopped by that same officer 3 times just walking to the grocery store. Each time, he treated me like a criminal." A young mother shared next. "My teenage son is terrified of the police now. He won't even walk to school alone anymore." Story after story revealed a pattern of fear and mistrust. The mayor listened to each one, taking careful notes. Officer Sullivan, confined to his home pending the investigation, watched these meetings on the local news. For the first time, he heard the impact of his actions through the voices of those he'd sworn to protect. His wife found him one evening sitting in their backyard, staring at nothing. "Michael, you need to eat something," Maria said softly. "I thought I was doing my job," he whispered. "I thought I was keeping people safe." But were you? She asked gently. Or were you seeing threats where there weren't any? Their children had faced bullying at school. Someone had spray-painted "bad cop" on their garage door. The weight of his actions was crushing his entire family. At City Hall, Mayor Wilson assembled a task force to review the entire police department. They uncovered systemic issues, inadequate training, poor oversight, and a culture that protected problem officers. This isn't just about one officer, the mayor told his staff. This is about changing an entire system. The task force recommended sweeping reforms, mandatory de-escalation training, implicit bias workshops, body cameras for all officers, and a civilian review board with real power. Chief Martinez supported every recommendation. She met with her officers, many of whom were resistant to change. This isn't punishment, she told them. This is about being better, serving better. Some officers embraced the changes. Others, like Sullivan's longtime partner, Officer Peterson, pushed back. We're being treated like criminals for doing our jobs, he complained. But the tide was turning. Younger officers, many from diverse backgrounds, spoke up in favor of reform. They shared their own experiences of witnessing questionable behavior and feeling powerless to address it. The police union initially fought the changes but backed down when public opinion overwhelmingly supported reform. Even some of Sullivan's staunchest defenders began to question their stance as more evidence emerged. Sullivan's mandatory counseling sessions started 3 weeks after the incident. Dr. Angela Torres, a specialist in law enforcement psychology, led the sessions. "Tell me about your father," she asked during their first meeting. Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. He was a cop. Old school. Taught me to never show weakness, always maintain control. And how did he view the communities he policed? The question opened a floodgate. Sullivan began to confront beliefs he'd held since childhood, biases passed down through generations of his family. Meanwhile, the mayor's reform package moved through city council. The vote was unanimous. Springfield would have a new police accountability system, enhanced training programs, and community policing initiatives. At a press conference announcing the reforms, Mayor Wilson spoke directly to the camera. "What happened to me was wrong, but it gave our city a chance to face hard truths. We're not just changing policies, we're changing culture." The investigation concluded with recommendations for Sullivan's termination, but instead of fighting it, Sullivan submitted his resignation. In his letter, he wrote, "I failed in my duty to serve and protect all citizens equally. I accept responsibility for my actions." The city stood at a crossroads, ready to forge a new path forward. 3 months had passed since the incident, and Springfield was slowly changing. The police reforms were taking effect, but Mayor Wilson felt something was still missing. Late one night, he made a decision that surprised everyone. "I want to meet with Officer Sullivan," he told Linda, his chief of staff. Linda nearly dropped her coffee. "Sir, are you sure? The lawyers advise against any contact. This isn't about lawsuits, it's about understanding. How can we truly heal if we don't face each other?" The request shocked Sullivan when he received it. He had been living quietly, working at his brother's hardware store while attending counseling sessions. His first instinct was to refuse, but something made him reconsider. "Maybe it's time," he told Maria that evening. "Maybe I need to look him in the eye and, I don't know, try to explain." The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a community center conference room. No lawyers, no cameras, just the 2 men and a mediator, Dr. Torres, who had been working with Sullivan. The tension was thick as they sat across from each other. The mayor's face had healed, but a small scar remained near his eye. Sullivan looked older somehow, the past months having aged him. Dr. Torres began. "The purpose of this meeting is dialogue, not blame. Mayor Wilson, would you like to start?" The mayor leaned forward. "I need to understand what you saw that night, not the official report. What did you see?" Sullivan took a deep breath. "I saw what I expected to see. A suspicious person in a high-crime area. I didn't see a person. I saw a threat." "Because I'm black?" The directness of the question made Sullivan flinch. And I want to say no, but honestly, yes, that was part of it. The admission hung in the air. It was the first time Sullivan had said it out loud. "Tell me about your father," the mayor said, surprising everyone. Sullivan's eyes widened. My father, he was a cop, 25 years on the force. What did he teach you about policing? He taught me to be tough, to never back down, he said. Sullivan paused, struggling with the words. He said some neighborhoods were war zones, that you had to show strength or they'd walk all over you. They? The mayor asked quietly. Sullivan nodded, understanding the implication. He had his views about different communities. I grew up hearing them every day. The mayor shared his own story then, about being stopped repeatedly as a teenager, about teaching his son to keep his hands visible during traffic stops, about the fear that lived in his community. I became mayor to change things, he said, but I realized I can't change anything if I don't understand the other side. So help me understand. Sullivan's walls began to crumble. He talked about his own fears on patrol, about incidents that had shaped his worldview, about slowly realizing that his approach was wrong. The counseling, it's made me see things differently, he admitted. I was policing based on fear, not service. The conversation continued for hours. They discovered unexpected common ground. Both were fathers worried about their children's future. Both loved their city. Both wanted safer streets. I can't undo what I did, Sullivan said near the end. But I want to be part of the solution if you'll let me. The mayor considered this. The new community policing program needs instructors who understand both sides. Would you be willing to share your journey? To help other officers recognize their biases. Sullivan was stunned. You trust me with that? I believe in redemption, the mayor replied. And I believe your story could prevent this from happening to someone else. As they shook hands at the end of the meeting, both men felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning. Dr. Torres later described it as one of the most powerful dialogues she had ever witnessed. Two men from different worlds, brought together by conflict, finding a path toward understanding. The news of their meeting spread quickly through Springfield. Some criticized the mayor for meeting with his attacker. Others saw it as a brave step toward real reconciliation. But for both men, it marked a turning point. The conversation had opened a door that neither had expected to walk through. 1 year later, Springfield looked different, not just in policies and procedures, but in spirit. The incident that had shocked the nation became the catalyst for genuine change. Mayor Wilson stood before a packed auditorium at the Police Academy graduation ceremony. The newest class of officers was the most diverse in city history. Among them sat Officer Rodriguez's younger brother, inspired by the reforms to join the force. You represent the future of policing, the mayor told the graduates. A future built on trust, understanding, and service to all. In the audience, Michael Sullivan watched quietly. No longer a police officer, he had found a new purpose. He now worked with the department's training division, sharing his story with raw honesty to help others avoid his mistakes. His workshops, titled Breaking the Cycle, had become mandatory for all officers. In them, he spoke openly about his biases, his failures, and his journey toward understanding. I thought I was protecting the city, he would tell each class. But I was part of the problem. It took losing everything to see that. The Civilian Oversight Board, established after the incident, had real power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. Its first chairperson was Mrs. Patricia Johnson, the elderly woman who had visited the mayor in the hospital. For 40 years, I watched and worried, she said at her first meeting. Now I have a voice in making things better. The reforms were working. Complaints against officers dropped by 60%. Community trust surveys showed improvement. Crime rates fell as residents became more willing to cooperate with police. Chief Martinez implemented a new program pairing officers with community mentors. Young officers spent time with families in the neighborhoods they patrolled, sharing meals and stories. We're not just enforcing laws, she told her officers. We're building relationships. Sullivan's family had healed too. His children returned to school without fear of bullying. Maria found strength in supporting other police families dealing with similar challenges. One Saturday morning, Sullivan was setting up for a community event when he saw a familiar face. The mayor had arrived early, coffee in hand. How's the workshop going? The mayor asked. Better than I deserve, Sullivan replied honestly. Yesterday, a young officer thanked me, said my story helped him recognize his own biases early. They worked side by side, setting up chairs and tables. Anyone watching would have found it hard to believe these were the same two men from that fateful night. The event was a community policing fair. Children played games with officers, residents shared concerns directly with department leadership, and local organizations set up resource booths. During his speech, Mayor Wilson reflected on the journey. A year ago, our city faced a crisis, but from that darkness, we chose to grow. We chose dialogue over division, understanding over anger. He introduced Sullivan to the crowd. This man and I were on opposite sides of a terrible moment. Today, we stand together for a better Springfield. The applause was hesitant at first, then grew stronger. Many in the crowd had their own stories of unfair treatment. Seeing this transformation gave them hope. As the sun set on Springfield, the mayor and the former officer sat on a bench outside the community center. "Do you ever think about that night?" the mayor asked. "Every day," Sullivan admitted. "But now I think about it differently. I see it as the night I finally woke up." The mayor nodded. "Me too. It showed me that change requires more than policies. It requires people willing to face hard truths." A group of children ran past, laughing and playing. Among them were kids of all backgrounds, including Sullivan's daughter and the mayor's son, who had become friends through their father's unlikely partnership. "Look at them," the mayor said. "That's what this was all for, a future where they don't inherit our mistakes." Springfield still had work to do. Not every problem was solved, not every wound healed. But the city had proven that from the worst moments could come the greatest transformations. As the two men watched the sunset, they knew their story had become more than just about them. It was about a city that chose reconciliation over revenge, growth over grudges, and hope over hate. The path forward wasn't easy, but Springfield was walking it together.